You're listening to the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
God promised eventually the destroyer, also called the oppressor and the aggressor, would be destroyed. And God, in His love, the word there in the Hebrew is hesed, His loyalty, His loyal love, His covenant loyal love, will see that the one from the house of David, the Messiah, will sit on David's throne and judge the world fairly in justice and righteousness. Now, this is a topic we're going to see over and over and over again in Isaiah.
There seems to be injustice and corruption pressing from every side these days. Do you long to see God's righteousness and justice come to earth? What a day that will be. In his message today, Pastor Ken reminds you of God's promise to put Jesus on David's throne to rule justly. God's love demands justice. He wouldn't be loving if he didn't rule rightly. It's hard to imagine, but one day Jesus will bring justice to his enemies. Never forget that God is still in control, and he will have his way on earth. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Isaiah chapter 15 as he continues his message, Assyria, Philistia, Moab.
By this time, though, 715 to 711, Assyria had taken most of the northern kingdom into exile. They were gone. Syria was in exile. The east side of Jordan, which had been previously occupied by Reuben and Gad, was empty. So the Moabites reestablished their territory and moved into it. They took over those cities north of the Arnon River. And that's what it looks like when Isaiah is prophesying, okay? So we're in chapter 15, verse 1. The oracle concerning Moab. Surely in a night, Ar of Moab is devastated and ruined. That's the name of a city. It's not a city of pirates where I'll go, Ar. It's actually the name of the city, Ar. Named after Arnon, the river, okay? Surely in a night, Kir of Moab is devastated and ruined. So Isaiah begins by recounting a sneak attack that takes place at night, possibly from Assyria, in violation of the normal rules of war as they were practiced at that time, against two major cities of Moab, Ar and Kir, and they're both going to fall the same night. They'll both be destroyed the same night. Now, we don't know with certainty where these two cities are. They could be 25 miles apart. They could be 6 miles apart. We're not real sure. The verse states, though, that in a single night, the two chief cities of Moab are carried by assault and destroyed and ruined. They're brought to a dead silence. Ar, Moab, this is the capital. It's on the south side of the river Arnon. Arnon, that's why it was called Ar. Kir is possibly a few miles from Ar. That's one view of it. It was renowned for its military strength, and the ruins have been identified as Kirak today. That's what it's called, as Kirak. The fall of these two cities sealed the doom of Moab. The ruins of Ar. The city was burned, obviously. This is right there near the Arnon River. Today it's called Balu. And then Kirak. Kir sat on top of a hill, and a lot of the stones that were in Kir have been reused by the Ottoman Empire when they built that castle. So if you take a look at some of the stones, you'll actually see images of Chemosh and several other things in the rock, in the stone. It's still there today because they reused it. But that castle was not Kir. It was a great place for a fortress, and the Ottoman Empire did the same thing with it. But that's Kirak today. Those are the two places that are destroyed. Ar is a city marking the traditional northern boundary of Moab, and Kur is Kir Hareseth. That's in the Central Plateau. That's if you say it's 25 miles away. I don't think so. I think the archaeology tends to point to the closer two locations. No matter where they are, okay, Isaiah starts off by letting us know that suddenly and without notice, contrary to the acceptable rules of war at that time, both cities were destroyed, just like that. It's a sneak attack. This huge army comes in and takes them out. Because if you go north of there, there's nothing there. I mean, they wouldn't be any burning cities that they would see. They would show up and they're just destroyed. The sudden and complete destruction reveals the inability that Moab's army has to protect them. They can't protect them. And now the two cities that were the major population centers, including a fortress, are gone because the enemy's attack. So, and as we read through this section of Scripture, when you start tracking down the names of the cities, you're actually moving south down the King's Highway as you read these cities. Verses 2 to 4, they've gone up to the temple and to Dibon. So there was a big temple to Chemosh at Dibon. Even to the high places to weep. Moab wails over Nebo and Medeba. Those are cities as you move south. Everyone's head is bald. They cut their hair off, okay, because that was a sign of repentance. They were in humility. Every beard is cut off. They cut off their beards. They were trying to do the same thing. They were trying to show their God that we repent. And they girded themselves with sackcloth. But this isn't working. They're not worshiping God. On their housetops and in their squares, everyone is wailing, dissolved in tears. Heshbon and Elilah also cry out. Their voices heard all the way to Jahaz, going further south. Therefore the armed men of Moab cry aloud, and his soul trembles within him. Even the army is wailing and crying. Lament and woe is the focus. By the way, the Moabite temple at Dibon, all that's left is a wall. Today it's I can't pronounce it, Dibah, but that's Dibon. Dibah is Dibon. Shaving one head and cutting off a beard were a sign of humiliation. Of course, they're wearing sackcloth. As they're moving south, their cities are being destroyed. They know it. They're all being destroyed. And the army can't do anything about it. They even talk about Heshbon and Elilah. Verses 5 to 9 of Isaiah 15, now you see the heart of Isaiah. My heart cries out for Moab. He's distraught by what he's seeing in the spirit. He's seeing this city being destroyed, and his heart cries out. Moab, remember, and they're brothers. They were considered a brother nation of Israel for a long time, even though they were a royal pain. Israel still had a fair amount of dealing with Moab. But he says here, his fugitives are as far as Zoar and Eglath Shalishiah. They go up to the ascent of Luhith weeping. Surely on the road to Horonaim they rise a cry of distress over their ruin, for the waters of Nimrim are desolate. The grass is withered, the tender grass has died out, there's no green thing. Therefore the abundance which they've acquired and stored up, they carry off over the brook Arabim. For the cry of distress has gone around the territory of Moab. Its wail goes as far as Eglaim, and its wailing even to Beer Elim. For the waters of Dimon are full of blood. Surely I'll bring added woes upon Dimon, a lion upon the fugitives of Moab and upon the remnant of the land. Isaiah becomes emotionally involved in what's taking place in verse 5. His heart cries out. Even though Moab is deserving of this judgment, it doesn't stop him from being moved with pity because of what's happening. He shares in the sorrow he describes because it's pretty vivid as to what he's seeing. He's seeing the alarm at the fierce invader, and he sees them hurrying to Zoar. That's at the far southern border of the nation. They're getting there as quick as they can. He's seeing this stream of refugees as he's viewing in the spirit, fleeing from destruction, heading south, crying and wailing. That's why we see what we see in verse 6 and 7. They have no resources left. Everything they have, they're carrying with them. It's literally a stream of refugees. With the fall of these cities ranging from the far north to the south, Moab's over with, and the refugees are clutching in their hands whatever they can carry and move south, wailing over their misfortunes. Now, don't lose that image. Don't lose that picture, because that is a picture of what is also going to happen at the midpoint of the Great Tribulation to Israel, when they're booted out and they have to go south. So it'll be the same picture. The Moabite refugees are going to be moving from place to place, trying to find security. And it's going to be just to the south. So the enemy came from the north. The whole country is going to suffer devastation. And if you start studying, yep, there was an army that did this. It was the Assyrians, they did that. The Babylonians did the same thing. But we also know that based on what it says in regards to the last days, the army of the beast is going to do the same thing too. And then he's going to reach a certain point and he can't do anything because God protects the people of Israel where they are. So even though the people are going to flee, they cannot escape the destruction. So we come to chapter 16, verses 1 to 4. Send the tribute lamb to the ruler of the land, from Selah by way of the wilderness to the mountain of the daughter of Zion. Then like fleeing birds, your scattered nestlings, the daughters of Moab, will be at the fords of the Arnon. Give us advice, make a decision, cast your shadow like a night at high noon. Hide the outcasts and do not betray the fugitive. Let the outcasts of Moab stay with you. Be a hiding place to them from the destroyer. For the extortioner has come to an end and destruction has ceased. Oppressors have completely disappeared from the land. Now, Selah is a location to the south and east of the Dead Sea. It's actually in the land south of them. It's in Edom. We're no longer in Moab. It's near a place called Basra, very close to Basra. It's an area considered by many scholars to be the approximate area that Israel will go to as they flee the beast after he declares himself to be God in the temple. Daniel and Jesus talked about this future event. In Matthew 24, verses 15 and 16, Jesus says, so when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken about by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. And this is a pretty mountainous area. There is a plateau, a small plateau in front of the large one behind it. Selah's on top of that plateau. That's where it is. It's hard to get to. There are ruins there. There was a city there, but that's where we think Israel will be going to at the end of the age. And then you have Basra. Basra is the plateau in the front, even though the community behind it is Basra as well. But when we see in the scriptures, Basra is where Jesus comes to save his people, because Isaiah says, who is this who comes from Basra with blood on his robes? Moab is looking for protection of their people. So here in chapter 16, Isaiah shows them sending the tribute lamb to Judah. Now, this is going to bring images back to the Jews who are reading this, that this has happened before. The nation's desperate, and they're submitting just as they did in the past. In 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 4, King Mesha of Moab was a sheep breeder, and he would send as tribute to the king of Israel 100,000 male lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams every year. That's a lot of sheep, but that's what he would do. And of course, they were then used for sacrifice in the temple. The point may be simply that the Moabites have retreated to some wilderness stronghold and they're sending a plea for help to Mount Zion. That could be it. And at the end of the day, when we start talking about the near term, that happened. The only place they could find escape is in Israel, is in Jerusalem. God protected Jerusalem. Anybody in Jerusalem would be protected from Assyria. So yeah, that did happen. Those who remain have sent tribute and are pressing for a decision from Judah. They're in hiding. Many Bible scholars believe that they're actually a little further south at a place called Petra. Now, right there near Basra and Selah, there's a place called Little Petra, which is also built by the Nabateans. And it looks just like Big Petra, which is further south. The point is, they want refuge from the enemy. They need refuge, and they're hoping Judah will supply refuge soon before all is lost. Because the point is, women are fleeing south over the Arnon. They're all headed south. They're trying to get away from this. So as we move through this prophecy, we also need to recognize it's not all about an event that's about to take place and bring down Moab in the near term. That did happen. At the end of the age, who has escaped, we think, to Petra or that general area during the Great Tribulation? Israel. Jesus said, When you see this happen, head for the hills. And that's where they go. The tribute comes from Selah or Petra. They're not in Moab anymore. They're in Edom, hiding from what's taking place in Moab, which could be the army of the beast trying to find the Jews. And they just are collateral damage at this point. The Moabites ask the people of Judah to protect them. And the way they say it is, protect us like night at the height of noon. And by contrasting day with night, they're not asking for ordinary shade. They want a shade that's so effective, it seems like they're in the dark. They want full protection. They're wanting to share in that protection that's being supernaturally provided for the Jews during the great tribulation by the Lord as they're hiding out in the desert. These are the people who have been working with them. Whatever the alliance is, whatever happens in Jordan, whatever goes on at that time, there's a group of folks who are trying to seek an opportunity to hide out with the Jews where they're hiding out. They don't want the enemy to find them. They're looking for refuge with Judah. Now, if you were to read the Septuagint version, as well as the Masoretic text, gives us a connection with the end of the age. Sometimes you lose stuff in the English translations, so you go back and you take a look and see what it says in some of the other texts. So Isaiah 16, 4 and 5 in the Septuagint says this: the fugitives of Moab will dwell beside you. Wait a minute. Now all of a sudden, this is making sense that we're talking about the end of the age. They will be a shelter for you from the face of the pursuer, because your alliance was taken away. What alliance? Well, remember, they made an alliance at the beginning of the tribulation. That alliance has now been taken away. And the ruler who was trampling has perished from the earth. And a throne will be restored with mercy, and he will sit on it with truth in David's tent, judging and seeking a judgment and eagerly pursuing righteousness. The Septuagint moves more to the message that Moab wants to participate with the Jews being hidden by God. And they'll help, and they'll be part of the shelter for them due to an alliance that was removed. And I keep coming back to alliance that was removed. Remember the beginning of the tribulation. This sounds an awful lot like events that take place in and around the abomination of desolation period, when the beast abrogates his 7-year treaty and begins hunting down the Jews and tribulation believers to kill them. And it could be that maybe these folks have all become tribulation believers. We don't know. We don't know what's happened once the rapture takes place. We don't know what's going on in Jordan. All we know is they've aligned themselves, and all of a sudden they're wanting to take part with the nation of Israel. They flee, the fugitives of Moab, which is Jordan, flee with them and shelter with them in the desert. Now, in the near term, the Moabites need refuge from Assyria. At the end of the age, those who live in Moab will hide the Jews and participate with them in hiding from the beast. Now, Moab is requesting to stay with Judah, the Jews, until the oppressor is no more and the destruction has ceased. Literally, that's in the plural, until the oppressors have utterly disappeared. Well, why is he saying oppressors? Well, you have the beast, you have his false prophet, you have those other nations that are part of that alliance. They're all part of it. But then we also see that there's a new Davidic king coming. Verse 6 of chapter 16 points to Isaiah 9:7 and points to Amos 9:11. So in Isaiah 9:7, it says this: there shall be no end to the increase of his government or of peace on the throne of David or over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. We're talking about Messiah. That's what this is all about here in verse 6. Amos chapter 9, verses 11 and 12 says, in that day I will rebuild the collapsing hut of David. I will seal its gaps, repair its ruins, and restore it to what it was like in days gone by. As a result, they will conquer those left in Edom and all the nations subject to my rule. The Lord who is about to do this is speaking. So remember again, Jesus comes from Basra, and then he lands at the Mount of Olives when the mountain splits in two. So, I mean, you start seeing bits and pieces of this same idea spread out throughout the scriptures, and here it is in Isaiah showing up in an oracle against Moab. Now, Moab, of course, historically was never a neutral state. They were a hostile state to Israel constantly. They were one of their biggest foes. I mean, it starts off where the king of Moab hires this guy named Balaam to try and say something bad about Israel, and he won't do it. So finally he says, look, here's how you take them down. Send some of your good-looking girls, and they'll do that. Well, they did, and a bunch of Jews were killed as a result of it. But all Peor and the whole mess that took place. Of course, Balaam wound up dying in that whole event. But strange as it is, this Moab that wanted to destroy Israel is now a protector for Jehovah's outcasts. It's strange, but it's not unexampled. God often raises up friends for his people from unexpected quarters and turns foes into friends. It just happens. But God promised eventually the destroyer, also called the oppressor and the aggressor, would be destroyed. And God, in his love, the word there in the Hebrew is hesed, his loyalty, his loyal love, his covenant loyal love, will see that the one from the house of David, the Messiah, will sit on David's throne and judge the world fairly in justice and righteousness. Now, this is a topic we're going to see over and over and over again in Isaiah. But only through Judah can this be accomplished, because the forces of Moab are inadequate. They cannot do it. Now, in the Masoretic text, we see sort of the same end of the age picture we see in the Septuagint. Now, this is from the Tanakh. This is the Jewish English language version of the Masoretic text. Verses 4 and 5 again of Isaiah 16. Let mine outcasts dwell with thee. So he's calling Moab my outcast and Israel my outcast. As for Moab, be thou a cover to him from the face of the spoiler. Again, Israel and Moab joining together for protection from this attacker. For the extortion's at an end, spoiling ceases. They that trample down are consumed out of the land. This is sounding like the Battle of Armageddon. It sounds like the end of the Great Tribulation. And a throne is established through mercy, and they're sitting thereon in truth in the tent of David, one that judgeth and seeketh justice and is ready in righteousness. The Tanakh shows Yahweh calling them mine outcasts. So what we see is that Moab will be one of the nations that comes to the mountain of God to seek his ways, but also is one of the nations that not only is trying to seek his ways, but is looking for protection and at the same time helping to protect his people. So when we see the sheep and goats judgment in the book of Revelation, they're going to be on the side of the sheep because they're the ones trying to protect God's people. Again, we don't know all of the events that are going to take place during the tribulation that drives them into this, but this is a picture of what they did when Assyria took them down and they tried to escape. It's the same picture. This leap suddenly into the end of the age in the oracle extends Moab's desire to find security in Judah into Isaiah's day far into the future. I mean, all of a sudden, bam, we're in the end of the age. Why is Moab on the list? We're going to get into that. It's the same for everybody on the list. It's pride. And in fact, for Moab, as it says in Isaiah 16, we've heard of the pride of Moab, an excessive pride.
You've been listening to a message from Isaiah on the UnSafe Bible. Pastor Ken has been diving deep into this major prophet to help us all understand how to apply these messages to our lives today. Well, as we see here in Isaiah, the whole scope and sequence of the life of Jesus, from the announcement of his birth to the second coming, the time he'll return for his people, for all those redeemed by his blood. This book is like a person crying out into a busy street, desperately needing to be heard. God is our one true salvation. Isaiah encourages his readers to trust and believe in God because it's God who dispels the darkness that comes from a sin-filled world. If you have questions about today's message or you just want to hear more, don't hesitate to contact us. You can get in touch with us by going to the UnsafeBible.com. Once there, use the Connect tab and click on Connect Card. Just fill out the form and we'll reach out to you. Remember to listen to other teachings from Pastor Ken. Just look under the Media tab at the UnsafeBible.com. If you found this ministry to be a blessing to you as you've been listening, you can show us your support for the UnSafe Bible ministry by checking out the Give tab. No gift is too big or too small, and will help us continue to reach the lost with God's Word. We're based out of Jupiter, Florida, and want to invite you to join us in person for the next service. All the information you need to come is found at theunsafebible.com. Until then, we want to thank you for joining us right here on the UnSafe Bible.